Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel and to some more urban legends. These will be cautionary tales. The first one is called Stranger Danger. Two Scottish men travelling on business in Texas were celebrating the end of their trip with a night out on the town. When the bar closed, they decided to continue the party. So they flagged down a taxi to take them back to their hotel. But they soon became paranoid, thinking that they were being driven in the wrong direction. So they asked the driver to stop and headed out into the night on their own, finding themselves lost in a quiet residential neighborhood. This was before mobile phones were commonplace, so the businessmen began knocking on doors to see if they could use someone's phone to call another taxi. Having no success, they ventured into a back garden to get someone's attention. Back home in Scotland, they were used to leaving their doors unlocked, so this didn't strike them as particularly unsafe, and certainly not after drinking all night. The homeowner, woken by the noise, came downstairs and saw two men peering in through his back door at 4 a.m. and he didn't think twice about firing his shotgun, killing them outright. The next is a shocking tale. A young extreme sports enthusiast who was covered in a variety of piercings, tattoos, and body modification was always looking for the next adrenaline rush. One day, while he was at work on a construction site, he bet his colleagues that he would clip two electrical lines to his piercings and give himself a thrill. They tried to persuade him that it wasn't a good idea, but this only made him more determined. Unaware that by applying electricity directly to his chest, he was at risk of experiencing more than just a funny sensation. He attached the electrical lines to each of his pierced nipples and promptly received a fatal shock through the heart from which he could not be revived. I have pierced nipples. I would never do that. That's crazy. Oh boy. The next is lawn chair lift off. Sometimes life really is like the movies. In 1982, a man from Los Angeles had a moment of inspiration that almost cost him his life. He had been chewing the fat with friends at a bar, speculating about how many balloons it would take to lift a man into the sky. As flying happened to be a long-held dream of his, he decided to purchase 40 balloons of the type that scientists launch into the clouds to research the weather and give it a try. After all, apart from his life, he had nothing to lose. So he went ahead with the plan and attached the bunch of balloons to his favourite lawn chair. Blasted with plastic water bottles, he estimated that he would be able to hover a couple of stories off the ground and carried an air pistol on board to burst the balloons should the altitude become unnerving. He settled into his chair while he plucked up the courage to tell his friends to let go of the lines, keeping him on the ground. But all of a sudden, the rope snapped, and the balloons were caught by a gust of wind. Before he could do anything about it, the lawn chair had surged to an altitude of 16,000 feet, while its pilot clung on for dear life. He called for help on a radio and began shooting the balloons. But then he dropped the pistol, leaving him at the mercy of the wind. After dodging some surprised birds and being spotted by a concerned airline pilot coming in to land at the airport, he collided with power lines, causing a minor blackout, and eventually landed 50 miles away from where he'd taken off. He had spent more than an hour in the sky, and apart from being a little shocked, he had escaped unarmed. The adventure of a lifetime was over, and he had an unlikely tale to tell his friends. But did he face a fine from the aviation authorities of the unauthorized trip. Once they decided which law, of course, he had broken. Who knows, he may have been fined. The next is always read the label. You should always make sure that a job is done properly. A barman tasked with cleaning the toilets in an old British pub was not keen on the job, so looked for ways to cut a few corners, an approach that almost cost him his life. He had a brainwave and mixed bleach with descaling solution together in order to kill two birds with one stone. However, he almost killed himself as well in the process. When he poured the concoction into the toilets, he was concerned to see an evil-looking vapour rising out of the cubicles that made his eyes sting and his lungs burn, so he made a swift exit. He barely made it out of the bathroom before evacuating the pub and passing out. Firefighters who attended the scene explained that his effort to speed up the job, he had unwittingly created a chlorine gas, the lethal vapour used in the trenches of World War I, and he was lucky to have escaped with his life. Don't mix chemicals if you don't understand them. The next is book binding. An 1852 collection of poems by John Milton, the author of Paradise Lost, which can be found in Devon, England, looks like any other book, but it is unique for disturbing reasons. It's bound in leather made from the skin of a convicted murderer. In 1830, George Cudmore was found guilty of murdering his wife. The rat catcher, a reportedly short and hunchbacked individual, had used poison to do away with his spouse, so that he could be with his lover. George was sentenced to be hanged, and also told that his body would be taken to the local hospital, where it would be used for experiments. It's not entirely clear how Cudmore ended up as a book cover 20 years later. The volume, containing many religious works, bears an inscription that tells readers whose skin they are holding, perhaps as a warning to keep them on the straight and narrow. The next. Guilty as charged. Have you ever put a 9-volt battery to your tongue to feel the tiny electric shock it gives you? If so, next time you should probably think twice. That little battery could kill you. A US Navy sailor was in the electronics class when he picked up 2 prongs attached to a 9-volt battery, intending to demonstrate the electrical resistance of the human body. Pressing each probe with his thumb, he made a fatal mistake. He gripped so tightly that the pointed probes pierced his skin, and he got a terrible shock. He learned the hard way that the skin provides most of the body's resistance to electricity, as your insides, being largely made of water, conduct electricity quite well. Bypassing the skin allowed the charge to go straight into his bloodstream, and a fatal shock crossed his heart, killing him instantly. His story is retold to all new recruits, warning them not to fool around with equipment. The next is, don't drink the water. When you are abroad, in a strange country, in a strange hotel, you expect things to be a little different to life back home. Don't drink the tap water is something that you will commonly be told, but you probably wouldn't expect to hear that in Los Angeles. In 2013, tourists at the hotel in LA had noticed that something was a little odd. The pressure was weak, and the water in the shower would run black for a while before turning clear. It also had a funny taste and smelled unusual. Nevertheless, they drank it, as they assumed that was just how water in LA was supposed to taste. Eventually, someone complained to staff at the hotel, who sent a worker to check whether the 4 large water tanks on the roof were in good order. What he found when he opened the lid turned his stomach, but it certainly explained the issues they had been having. Inside one of the cisterns was a partially decomposed human body. The unfortunate maintenance man had found the remains of a female student who had gone missing after staying in the hotel several weeks previously. Guests at the establishment had been using corpse water to shower and brush their teeth for weeks, as well as drinking it. Pathologists determined that the student had drowned in the water, so she wasn't killed before ending up in the heavy-lidded tank. But how she ended up there, investigators were baffled. They had the girl on camera at night. She was last seen by other guests, and she appeared agitated. She was pictured in an elevator, peeking into the corridor, as if she didn't want to be seen, but then pressing all the buttons. It shouldn't have been possible for her to get on the roof, as it was a locked and a restricted area. There were no more leads, and her death remains a mystery to this day. And that's not an urban legend, that actually happened. The urban legend surrounding it's more the death as to why and how she ended up in that water tank. Because it's virtually impossible, guys, unless someone put her there. The next is cruise control. A young couple from France were honeymooning in the United States. It was their dream to hire a big American motorhome and go on a road trip across the country. They found the perfect vehicle, and after the salesman had shown them the 2 showers, cable TV, king-size bed and cruise control, they wasted no time in getting on the road. A few days later, they were travelling across the desert overnight, and the husband had gone to sleep for a few hours while his new wife took the wheel. It wasn't long before the long empty roads and the warmth of the night made her feel sleepy, so she decided to make a coffee. She didn't want to wake her partner, so she found the cruise control button, flicked it on, and went to make a drink. She never made it back to her seat. The vehicle left the road at the next corner and was found a week later in a mangled heap at the bottom of a rocky ravine. The girl didn't know that the cruise control couldn't handle corners, and the trucker simply plunged over the precipice. Neither honeymooner survived. Wake up and smell the perfume. A warning circulated online, advising American women to be wary of strangers when visiting shopping malls. It followed news reports of a number of middle-aged ladies being approached by smartly dressed men in the car parks of malls who asked them for advice on a perfume that they were thinking of buying their wives or girlfriends. It turned out that the small perfume bottles or handkerchiefs that the men were carrying were filled with the latest fashionable eau de toilette with the intense mixture of chloroform. When the ladies smelled the scent, they became instantly incapacitated. Some were abducted, bundled in the back of a van, driven to remote locations and tortured for the bank details, whereas others were robbed and left for dead in the car park. The report quoted a police source saying that even men who had a female partner with them could not be trusted, as the women were likely in on the scam. Don't try this at home. You may know the trick of making a bottle of cola explode by dropping a packet of mints into it and screwing the cap back on, but you may not know how dangerous it can be. When the internet recently sparked a new cola mint craze, kids in playground around the world started creating bigger and bigger explosions to post online. In one school in England, this led to tragic consequences. The young boy involved, referred to as Billy in the papers, was known as the joker of the class and renowned at his school for doing absolutely anything that fellow pupils sort of dared him to do. They decided to use him as a guinea pig to see what happened when you combined cola and mints, not in the bottle, but in the human body. The ingredients were prepared: a 2-litre bottle of drink and a big bag of mints, and a large crowd gathered in the playground. Billy ate the entire bag of sweets first and washed them down with as much cola as he could manage. At first, everything seemed fine, and the assembled kids cheered. But then Billy groaned and bent over with terrible cramps, rolling around on the floor. Witnesses reported that his eyes appeared to bulge out of his head. He tried to bring up the noxious liquid, but it was too late. He gave a final sharp cry of pain and died on the spot. Investigators were able to explain the cause of the tragedy. When you add minced cola, the ingredients in the sweets break the surface tension of the liquid, which is what prevents the pressurized carbon dioxide, which creates the bubbles, from escaping all at once. The mince, therefore, causes a sudden and violent release of gas, which is what makes the liquid explode out of the bottles. By ingesting the cola and mince together in such large quantities, Billy had caused a huge build-up of gas in his abdomen, far too large to escape through the usual channels, and his stomach had exploded in seconds. It was advised that nobody try to recreate this stunt at home. Yes, do not try that at home, ever. Very dangerous. Please don't. The next is a sartorial surprise. Staff at a chain closed stores in Austria were inundated with hundreds of calls from concerned customers after an incident at one of their shops. A woman had been trying on a jacket for winter when she felt a sharp prick in her arm. She assumed it was a stray pin and complained to the assistant, who apologised and said she would look into it. The customer thought nothing of it, but on her drive home, her heart rate suddenly dropped. She blacked out and crashed the car. She was in a coma for a month. The doctors were confused at first. She had no visible injuries from the crash, but her blood results indicated that she showed all the signs of having venom in her system. It was not a pin in the jacket. It was a poisonous snake that had bitten her as she tried the garment on. The store was shut, and police found an adder in the arm of the jacket, which had been put back on the rack so another customer could put it on. The deadly snake had found its way into the lining of the jacket when it was looking for somewhere to hibernate, and it was very hungry. Yes, snakes will get into any kind of places, let's be honest. They're like mice and rats. They will just slither their way in and hide there unsuspectingly. The next is electric blankets. You have to be safe when it comes to electric blankets, guys. Don't try anything weird at home with them. Always unplug them. Don't leave them plugged in. Very important. A warning was put on social media claiming that a certain brand of electric blanket was being recalled across Europe after a safety scare. A mother who had recently bought the item to keep her toddler warm had woken by his screams one night. She rushed in his room and found him clinging to the bars of his cot, trying to escape from a small hissing snake. The reptile was an exotic tiger snake, highly venomous and not native to the country. An investigator discovered that the blanket, which had been manufactured in Asia, had become infested with snakeheads that were not easily detectable from the outside. Cold conditions on the ship that transported the products to Europe had kept the animals in a state of hibernation. But when the blanket was turned on, the pleasant warmth encouraged the eggs to hatch, and the baby snakes were soon looking for their first meal. Oh my days. Imagine doing that's horrendous, guys. I'm not a hater of snakes. I like snakes, and it's not their fault. They're just doing what they do to survive. But imagine that, though. It's very scary, isn't it? The next is the envelope. A woman had a job in New York post office where she spent all day attending to customers and licking the awful lot of stamps. One day she lost concentration and cut her tongue on an envelope. Later that day, returning home after work, she realised that her tongue had become swollen, and she found it difficult to eat. Visits to the doctors did not reveal the source of the problem, but eventually she reached the point when she could not even drink, so she made an emergency visit to the local hospital. The medics were perplexed and took an x-ray of her mouth. They rushed back to her and told her she needed emergency surgery, or she may soon lose the ability to breathe as well. They put the woman under anaesthetic. When they sliced into the swelling, hundreds of baby spiders crawled out onto her face. The doctor had to suck them out of her throat with a vacuum pump. It transpired that the envelope came from a batch which had been kept in South American warehouse where the paper had been contaminated by the eggs from a highly poisonous wolf spider. When the woman licked the paper seal, the eggs transferred to her mouth in her saliva, and the cut on her tongue became the perfect place for them to grow. They would soon have hatched of their own accord. All of the envelopes from the warehouse were recalled before somebody else suffered the same fate. Geez, that's horrendous. If that really happened, imagine having a swollen tongue, going to the emergency room, and then having it open up and loads of spiders come out of your tongue. Oh, no, 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 no. I love tarantulas, I do. With spiders, I can be iffy with them, and I'll tell you why. They don't really give any warning when they're going to bite. Tarantulas at least give you a warning before they bite. But I'm not afraid of spiders or anything, but something like that's pretty... I mean, it's a wolf spider. You know, they are not very nice, their bite. So that would be quite horrendous. The next is, watch out for the crumbs. Doctors in Taiwan warned of the dangers of eating food in bed after 2 cases ended up in the local hospitals. A man who was admitted to a ward for a routine foot operation was addicted to snacks and was repeatedly told by the nurses not to hide food and empty packets in his bedclothes because they could attract ants. He ignored them. He wasn't scared of ants. But soon after his operation, he found himself back in hospital, complaining of terrible headaches that no amount of drugs could treat. When doctors scanned his brain for abnormalities, they were horrified to discover a mass of black insects inside his ear canals. A colony of ants, attracted by his snacks, had entered his ears when he was recuperating from his operation and were gradually eating away at the insides of his skull. He would have lost his hearing had doctors not located the infestation in time. The authorities highlighted another similar report. A 14-year-old girl complained of severe earache, and her mother explained that she had a sweet tooth and often ate midnight snacks in bed, despite being told not to. Upon inspection, the doctor found thousands of ants packed deep in her ear. They had crawled there in search of food and died. Ew, that's another awful one as well. Ants living inside us, spiders and snakes, oh my. Anyway, I digress. Dangerous deposits. Canadian citizens received email warnings after a woman reportedly died after licking an envelope when making a deposit in a Toronto bank. The message quoted a police officer who said that investigators had found traces of rat poison in the dead woman's system, and, by retracing her steps that day, they had narrowed the source down to the glue she had licked while making a deposit at the bank. As a result, the establishment was closed and all envelopes were seized. However, a rumour then spread that this wasn't an isolated incident, so a number of banks announced that, while they had no evidence of any envelopes being tampered with, they had since switched to ones that didn't need licking. I should bloody hope so as well. Geesh, licking an envelope and dying. It's not on, is it? I think this is yours. Police in New York publicised a tale they'd heard from a member of the public in order to warn others. A young man visited a 24-hour convenience store late one night on his way home from the city. He found a parking spot some distance away and walked to the shop, checking his wallet as he went. The store was empty. Even the assistant was not there, save for one other man, an older gentleman with grey hair, who appeared to be aimlessly browsing the shelves as he had nothing in his basket. The young man made his selections, paid at the automatic checkout, and then set off down the road towards his car. He reported later that he felt as though he was being watched. He was just about to start the engine when there was a knock at the window. It was the old man from the store, holding a $20 bill. The driver rolled the window down a little, and the man smiled. "I think you dropped this," he said, waving the money around. "I don't think so. I always know how much money I'm carrying." "Thanks, though," replied the young man politely, wound the wind back up. He had checked his wallet before he went in the shop. He didn't have a $20 bill in there. As he started the car, the man knocked on the window again and repeated, "I think you dropped this." Although the driver wanted to pull away, the road was busy, and as he waited, the man knocked on the window again, still repeating, "I think you dropped this." Why was this old man doing that? Why was he so insistent? While waiting for a gap in the traffic, the driver opened the window to tell the man to keep the money because it wasn't his, but he noticed that it was no longer greeted by a smile but a scowl. As the older gentleman started to tug at the top of the window, trying to thrust a hand inside and open the door, the driver hurried to close it, so the strange man began to bang his elbow on it. The young man thought that the glass was going to break, so he put his foot on the accelerator, almost causing an accident as he joined the busy road. At first, the youngster didn't tell anybody about the incident. He wasn't entirely sure what had happened anyway. Eventually, he decided to go to the police station and make a report. When the authorities heard the story, they agreed that the older man's behaviour was bizarre and checked the CCTV recording from the shop, only to find it had been wiped. There was nothing more they could do, apart from warning the public. Besides, they doubted whether a crime had actually been committed, and was sure that the money wasn't his after all. Several days later, a retired detective rang the station after reading the report in the paper. He said that it probably didn't mean anything, but the story was ringing a bell with him. When he was in the force, he had worked on a case, long since closed, concerning the death of the young man. The victim had been abducted, murdered, and dumped in his own car. The last person to see him alive witnessed him being handed money that he had apparently dropped on the street by a good Samaritan. The police recommended that everybody be aware, at all times, of the money they were carrying. Not to accept it off someone who knocks on your window and simply says it's yours. Always be careful, be safe. Definitely check. And if you're alone at night driving and you need to wind that window down, it's probably not a good idea. Maybe just shout at them through the window instead. Yeah, that's what I would probably do. The next is called Goodbye Mum. A young woman from South London posted the following tale on social media as a warning to others. She was in a busy supermarket doing her weekly shop when she noticed an elderly lady following around and smiling. At first, the girl ignored her, thinking that perhaps the old lady was not quite all there. But this went on for a while. The girl asked if she could help her with anything. After all, she had noticed that the lady was pushing a large trolley full of food. The elderly woman apologized for being a nuisance, but said she couldn't help noticing that the girl just looked like someone she knew. The girl became curious and asked who it was, so the lady explained that she was the spitting image of her daughter, who had died several months earlier. Now she was in full flow, telling the young woman how she missed her child terribly, how it was all made more unbearable because she had not been able to say goodbye, and how the last time she had seen her, they had parted on bad terms. Unfortunately, she hadn't been able to make it to the hospital because of her own medical condition. The girl expressed her sympathies and got on with her shopping. She felt guilty for not doing more, but was unsure what to say. Then the old lady started to attract the attention of other shoppers with her crying as the girl walked back to her and tried to comfort her, apologising if she had upset her. The lady asked if she could walk around with the girl while she did her shopping. She wouldn't be any bother, but it might make her feel a little better. It was the least the young lady could do. So she took her around the shop and tried to make small talk. Once they reached the till, the elderly woman went in line first as the girl helped her unload her trolley. She was asked for one more thing. Could she say goodbye, Mum? As the woman left. The girl thought it an odd request, but felt as if she owed her something and agreed. As the girl packed the lady's trolley items into her trolley, she saw her whisper something in the ear of the cashier before moving towards the exit. The girl called after her, as promised, "Bye, Mum." The lady smiled and went on her way, as the young woman felt as if she had done her a good deed for the day. She packed up her own shopping, and the cashier told her the total. When she saw the amount, she assumed there had been some mistake. Although there was only a few items in a basket, the bill was well over £100. The cashier explained that there had been no error. The extra cost was down to her mother's shopping. The girl asked what she meant, but it slowly began to dawn on her what had happened. "Your mother said that you, her daughter, were picking up the bill. That's so good of you." The woman looked towards the door, but the old lady was nowhere to be seen. The cashier wouldn't let her look in the car park without settling the bill, so the girl had no choice but to pay up. Wow. All that just to get her shopping paid for. I find that drastically hard to just comprehend. I mean, what a story. If it was, was it a story? We don't even know if it was a story or not, but if that was just a story to have her shopping paid for, then crikey, it was some what a story to tell, guys, honestly. Wowzers. The next is smart thieves. An email circulated a few years ago warning about how smart criminals were getting in today's digital age and telling motorists to be more vigilant than usual. Car thieves are not just smashing windows these days. A man had parked his car at the swimming pool. He worked as a security guard and followed his usual careful procedure. Parked in the far corner of the lot, where his car wouldn't bring attention to itself. He shut his sat-nav in the glove box after using it, where it couldn't be seen by thieves, and put his wallet in the central console, as he didn't trust the flimsy lockers at the swimming pool. The man returned to the car after the swim and didn't notice anything amiss. The next day he needed to travel to a new office for work. As he needed his sat-nav again, he realised all of a sudden it was not in the glove box. He was sure that was the last place where he'd left it. After a fruitless search everywhere, he realised that it must have been stolen. How could that have happened, though? There was no sign of anybody breaking into the car. He eventually convinced himself that he must have left the vehicle unlocked in the swimming pool car park and accepted the loss of the device. Some days later, he returned home from work to find his front door wide open and his house in disarray. There had been a break-in, and they had taken everything of any value from the downstairs rooms. The police concluded that the thieves were obviously professionals, and that they must have known he wouldn't be home. The officers asked if anything unusual had happened in the previous days, such as someone tampering with his car. So he told them about the sat-nav, and they suggested taking a look at his vehicle. They went straight to the passenger side door and beckoned him over. There was a tiny hole under the lock, barely visible unless you were looking for it. Resembled a bullet hole. The officers explained how the scam worked. Thieves used custom-made air guns to punch holes through the lock, opening the car door with no fuss, and only in half a second. It only worked on certain models, but they knew exactly what they were looking for. The criminals even locked the car doors again, so as to not arouse the victim's suspicion of this, leaving plenty of time for them to carry out their plan. Indeed, once inside, they were even craftier. They located the sat-nav, found the car owner's home address in the system, and visited at another time, breaking in when the car was not on the drive, and therefore the owner was unlikely to be at home. The thieves also had a habit of stealing credit cards, and never the whole wallet, never all the cards. He hadn't checked his. He was certain his wallet was safe, but sure enough, one of the credit cards that he rarely used was missing. In a panic, he rang the company and told that the thieves had run up thousands of dollars worth of charges in only a few hours on the day the sat-nav went missing. The man asked the police why they had targeted his vehicle, as he never left valuables on display. But they said that it was just bad luck. This method of entry was so quick and easy that thieves tried it on many cars as they dared, and most people never noticed the hole. The email ended by warning drivers to keep a close eye on their door locks, never to leave their home address in a sat-nav, or at least never label it as such, and to park their cars in highly visible places where potential thieves might be noticed. Oh my days. Interesting way of doing things, might I add. The next is opera tickets. A successful middle-aged couple had moved to a neighbourhood in the suburbs. They'd recently bought a new BMW SUV and parked it prominently in front of their new abode. They were going out to the restaurant to celebrate moving into their new house, and some friends picked them up. When they returned, they were shocked to find their car had disappeared off the drive. The police arrived, but officers didn't hold much hope of finding it in one piece, Such desirable motors were stolen by joyriders, ram raiders, or professional thieves. So imagine the pair's surprise when they opened the curtains the next morning to find the BMW parked exactly where they left it, apparently without a scratch. There was an envelope under the wipers. Inside was a letter from a man who said that he was sorry for taking the car without asking, but his own vehicle had broken down in the street, with his pregnant wife inside. She'd gone into labour without warning, so they were left with no other option but to find another car. They knocked on the door for help and couldn't help notice that it was open and that the BMW keys were in the hall on the table. So they took the vehicle to get to the hospital. The car owner was understandably suspicious until he read the end of the note and saw what else was in the envelope. The letter ended, "Please accept these tickets as a peace offering." Inside there were 2 tickets to the opera, which the couple happened to love. On the night of the performance, they got dressed to the nines and, thinking they deserved a proper celebration, got a taxi into town. When they returned, they couldn't believe their eyes. Once again, the BMW had disappeared. They wondered whether they had been fallen to the victim of some bizarre scam as they went inside the house to call the police. But the night was about to get worse. The front door was open and they found an envelope in the letterbox. Inside was a note saying, "I hope you enjoyed the opera. The entire house has been ransacked." What a scam. Wow. Oh boy, that's just horrible. But, I mean, you can't trust anyone, can you, these days? Emergency stop. One night in 1970, a young woman was driving on a California highway with a 10-month-old daughter beside her. They were visiting the woman's mother in the next town, and it was late. There were few cars on the road. The saloon behind her had been following a few miles. Suddenly, the driver began flashing his lights and repeatedly sounding the horn. The young mother, assuming that he was just an impatient driver, pulled over and slowed to let him pass. But he stayed behind, still honking his horn. She reluctantly stopped, and the other car pulled up behind her. The driver stepped out of the vehicle and walked up to a window. When she lowered a couple of inches, he was a man, about 30 years old, with spectacles and rather ordinary looking. He told her that he'd been trying to get her to stop because her rear wheel was wobbling. It looked like the nuts were loose, and it would be dangerous to continue. The man offered, of course, to sort out the problem for her, as it wouldn't take long and the woman wouldn't even have to get out of the car. She agreed. She hadn't noticed anything wrong with the way the car was driving, but she didn't want to take any risks with her daughter in the vehicle. The man went to his boot, retrieved a wrench, and got to work. Once he finished, he waved her onto the highway again, and soon she couldn't see his car in her mirrors. But all of a sudden, she heard a mighty knocking noise on the car. As startled she was, her daughter started crying and she veered onto the hard shoulder, skidding to an halt. She couldn't see in her mirrors that one of the wheels had fallen off. She was wondering what to do next when a car pulled over in front of her. It was a man who had supposedly fixed her wheel. He apologised, saying that it must have been worse than he thought. He wasn't a professional mechanic after all, and offered to drive her to the nearest garage to get help. She decided that she didn't have many other options and climbed into the car with her daughter. They soon passed a garage, but the man missed a turn off. When they passed a couple more, the woman asked why he wasn't stopping. He changed the subject. This went on for some time, and the woman began to panic. Finally stopped at a junction, so she had enough time to grab her daughter and flee the car, running to a nearby cornfield. She could hear him calling for her and saw the light from his torch, but the crops were high enough to hide her presence. Eventually, he got back into his car and drove off. After making sure that he was not going back, the young mother flagged down another motorist and asked to be taken to the nearest police station, where she recounted the evening's events to an officer on duty. The policeman explained that there had probably had been nothing wrong with her car until the man stopped her and loosened all the nuts on the wheel. Afterwards, all he had to do was wait for it to fall off. As the officer was talking, the woman noticed a wanted poster on the station notice board. The face on it looked identical to the man on the highway. It was a suspect in a brutal murder who would later become famous as the Zodiac Killer. the unknown serial killer who sent cryptic notes to the San Francisco Chronicle about his crimes. A few months later, the paper received one referring to the woman and her baby that I gave a rather interesting ride for a couple of hours one evening. The woman's car was located again. It was burned out. The Zodiac Killer was never identified. May still be at large. He has been identified now, guys. But, yeah. Wow, the Zodiac Killer. I did not know it was going to go that way, but it did. And if you don't know anything about the Zodiac Killer, you should really go on True Crime and have a look. The next is Mind the Gap. A young professional was taking the last train home to the London Underground one night. The carriage was almost empty for once, but at the next stop 3 people boarded, who appeared to be high or drunk and were stumbling around. They sat directly opposite the woman and she avoided eye contact, as she didn't want a scene. The train pulled away from the platform, and after a while she began to feel someone was watching her. She saw out of the corner of her eye that the woman sitting across from her was staring blankly in her direction. This made her feel uncomfortable, but she pretended not to notice and didn't react. Nevertheless, every time she looked up, the woman was still staring. She wanted to get off that train, but it was the last train, and moving seats wasn't a solution either, as it might have attracted unwanted attention. Then a man came down the carriage and sat next to her. He leaned in quietly and told her she should get up at the next station. She asked him why, and he told her to trust him, because something wasn't quite right with the train. The next stop was at the busy intersection, so she agreed. As soon as we were off the train, the man apologised if he had scared her, but he had no choice. The woman, sitting opposite her, wasn't staring. He explained she was dead. She was popped up between 2 men. He had seen them get on the train, and she had a terrible wound in the back of her head. The girl later found out that the 2 men had been arrested for the woman's murder, who, well, it hadn't been their first victim of the night. And that's really scary to think that, isn't it? That a woman's there, she's dead in front of you, and no idea. That's really sad. The next is razor blades. A water park in Germany with a large pool and many flumes was closed down after its main attraction, the black hole, down which kids used to slide in complete darkness, caused several nasty injuries to members of the public. Razor blades were found embedded in the slide, which was slicing swimmers as they slid past. Many didn't realise they had been cut until they saw the plunge pool at the bottom of the slide turn red with blood. Similar incidents have been widely reported in America and England. I have nothing to say about that. That's the first time I've kind of heard of that sort of activity, razor blades in slides and stuff. The next is Baby Tripper. The replacement babysitter had arrived. She was late, but she was all they could get at short notice. The girl had come recommended by one of Jennifer's friends at work, who said that although she might come across a little ditzy, she was a bit of a hippie. She was great with children. Her appearance didn't quite match what they were used to from their usual prim and proper sitters. She had face piercings and dreadlocks, but they were late for dinner, so they left with no choice. They could always call and make sure that everything was okay. Jennifer told her that there was chicken in the fridge if she was hungry. Later on in the evening, Pete called home to check on the girl, but she said that everything was groovy and that she'd even put the chicken in the oven for them. He thought that was a bit odd, but didn't dwell on the conversation any further and went back inside the restaurant. When they got home, they were appalled to find the babysitter lying on the carpet in the living room, staring blankly into space and murmuring. She was clearly high on something and couldn't be woken from a reverie. They ran upstairs to check on the baby, but she was nowhere to be found. They started to panic, shaking the sitter to get her to talk, but she was not responding. Then Pete noticed the oven light was on. It was the only place where they hadn't looked. He wrenched the door open and to his horror saw the baby inside, wrapped in foil. Luckily, the babysitter had been so away with the fairies that she hadn't turned on the gas. Oh, jeez. I know that's like one of them urban legends that it didn't used to come across as true. Like, it was one of those urban legends that you could probably say, no, that never happened. But these days, now, it has happened. Like, people have done that, and it's just mind-blowing why. But, jeez. No. That is something I just can't get my head around something that bad. I can't. It's horrendous. The last and final one in this category is the shopping mall man. A warning was circulated on the internet, issued by a woman who reported an unsettling experience at her local giant shopping mall. She had visited on a Saturday to do a regular shop, and on return to her car, she was upset to find that she had a flat tyre, especially as it was relatively new. She opened the boot of her car, retrieved the spare tyre and the wheel wrench and set to work. However, as the garage had fitted the wheel using an air gun to tighten the nuts, she was having trouble loosening them and couldn't budge them at all. She was about to give up and call for help when a smartly dressed man carrying a briefcase appeared and asked if she needed a hand. She explained the situation, and he said that he would have a go, suggesting that she could wait in the car. But she wanted to watch how he did it. He was heavily built and managed to remove the tyre in no time, chatting to her about how mechanics always fasten the nuts too tightly. She took up his offer of attaching the spare as well, and as he put the flat tyre in the boot, and then he closed it. The woman thanked him and was ready to set off on her way, when she noticed that the man no longer had his briefcase. She assumed that he must have dropped it in a boot. When she reminded him, he said that his own car was actually parked all the way on the other side of the car park, and he asked if she wouldn't mind giving him a quick lift round. Then he would get the case. She thought it was slightly an odd request, but she was grateful for his help, that it would have been churlish to decline. He told her that he was only in the part of the mall because he had got lost when looking for a food court, and ended up walking out of the wrong exit. They both got in the car, and she drove slowly through the car park. The woman claimed to be paranoid about the spare wheel falling off and insisted that she wanted to get out to check the nuts were still tight. The man assured her that, well, it'd be fine, but she stopped the car outside the main entrance and got out. She took a cursory glance at the wheel before running back into the mall as fast as she could, taking the car keys with her. She made straight for the guard's office and explained that there was a strange man in her car who was making her feel uncomfortable. He had changed her tyre, but he was giving her far too many details, which made her suspicious. And he had locked his briefcase in a boot, she believed on purpose. The guard strode out to her car, and sure enough, the man had disappeared, without his case, which they took back to the office to examine. The woman gasped as she saw the contents: a rope, a sharp knife, some kind of bottled chemical. It had all been a front to get inside her car. She wondered what would have happened if she had done as he had asked and stayed in the car. Were she not to notice dropping his briefcase in her boot? What would happen? Later she learned that the air had been let out of the tyre deliberately. There was no puncture. What the man had planned for her was a sinister mystery, but the authorities deemed it a sufficiently serious case to warn the wider public. It failed that time, but of course, it was probably sure to try again. Being that type of person, they generally do, don't they? And that's why you should never let a stranger in your car. Strange man of any kind. If you're a woman on your own, don't do it. Even if it's a woman and you're a woman, don't do it. A man letting in a woman, just don't do it, guys. Maybe back in the day it was really safe to do stuff like that, or I don't know, maybe it wasn't and things just weren't reported, but now we know how dangerous it is, right? People can look so innocent and friendly, and they can dress like they're $1 million and that they are gentlemen or ladies as such, and it's not always the case. Sometimes there's something dark and deep inside them that we really don't want to see that side of. So it's always best to keep our guard up and be very careful when it comes to that. Thank you so much for listening to this selection of urban legends. I appreciate it. And of course, many blessings.